Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the question whether Guru Golwalkar was a Nazi, no less. Guru Golwalkar, or fully Madhav Sadashiv Golwalkar, was the second leader of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangha, that is the RSS, or the National Volunteer Association, which is the largest Hindu nationalist organization. It was founded in 1925, originally as the security service of the Congress meeting of that year. Congress, the organization behind the freedom movement. So it was entirely part of the freedom movement. Dr. Hedgewar, who founded it, Dr. Keshav Baliram Hedgewar, had been with the Bengal revolutionaries, which was a more extremist wing of the freedom movement, but he reconverted to a different kind of politics. In fact, he conceived his organization as something else than political. He wanted to stay out of politics. He thought that the Hindu society had enough politics already. The Congress was perfectly fine as it was, but it needed a cultural form of self-organization, which he was going to provide. Now, he died in 1940, and then he was succeeded by Madhav Sadashiv Golwalkar. In 1938, he wrote a small booklet called We Are Nationhood Defined. That book went through a second, third, and fourth print run. In the second print run, there was a revision, that is to say, it was a second edition, where the foreword by M.S. Ane was suppressed, and where some rather extreme expressions in the book were remedied, were corrected. After the war, after independence, and after the murder of Mahatma Gandhi in 1948, he refashioned his organization and started a lot of auxiliary organizations, all specific for one field: a women's organization, a trade union, a student organization, and so on. And even a political party. He didn't believe in politics, but he agreed to found a political party after the Hindu Mahasabha, another political party, had become unviable when one of its members had murdered Mahatma Gandhi. So a new political party with a Hindu direction was called for, and he provided that, though against his gut feeling. He said, you know, when agreeing to the political party, okay, a house also needs a lavatory. So this political party was founded. It was the Jan Sangh, which in 1980 was reconstituted as the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is presently, at the time of my speaking in 2018, the governing party in Delhi. In 1966, he also brought out another book that is still used by his followers still today, called Bunch of Thoughts. But you see, that book is not so much criticized and not very extreme. There are few things in there that they can seize upon to criminalize or to somehow demonize the RSS. By contrast, We Are Nationhood Defined, that has a few passages that are easy to use in propaganda against the RSS specifically, or the Hindu movement more generally. So one historical fact that has to be mentioned here is in 1948 the murder of Nathuram Godse, the murder by Nathuram Godse of Mahatma Gandhi. So he was a member of the Hindu Mahasabha led by Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. He had been the president in 1937 to 1943 when, out of enthusiasm for his leadership, Nathuram Godse chose to join this party. So at that time, technically, formally, he left the RSS, but ideologically he was still on the RSS line, and he effectively sung the major song of the RSS on his way to the gallows. So after this murder, there was a big crackdown on both the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. And so that changed a lot of things within the organization, and one of them was that it discarded, it put an end to the popularity, the relative popularity of this booklet, We Are Nationhood Defined. From that point onwards, the book was confiscated by the police and it was not reprinted. And in fact, Golwalkar himself vetoed the reprint. He thought the book was immature. And so from 1948 onwards, no RSS member has effectively been indoctrinated in that book. In fact, 99.9% of RSS members or other Hindu activists have never even seen the book. Most Hindu activists outside the RSS prefer not to mention Golwalkar, prefer to live without even the memory of Golwalkar, precisely because he has been tainted or has a negative reputation. Within the RSS, by contrast, they keep on celebrating Golwalkar no end. You see, on RSS activities, even having nothing to do historically with Golwalkar, who died in 1973, they still brandish his photograph. They still celebrate him. But others think that he has become an embarrassment. Now, the embarrassment is based, the embarrassment of the Hindu movement in general is based on two things. One is the murder of the Mahatma Gandhi by a Hindu activist that has remained a shadow over the entire Hindu movement. And the other is this booklet, We Are Nationhood Defined, written in 1938, finished around, well, the first week of November 1938. And that book has gained a very bad reputation because of two passages. And so these two passages were written when Gowalkar was just 32 years old. It was the first booklet by him. He himself describes it as this maiden attempt of mine. Now, I personally, as a writer, wouldn't want to be judged solely on the basis of what I had written by age 32. In his case, too, it sounds credible when he said in 1948, well, this book was immature, it is better that it disappears. So, according to the Times of India, its correspondent Akshaya Mukul on 9th of March 2006, and I quote, "We is considered the basic charter of the Sangha." Now, with the expression the Sangha is usually meant the Sangh Parivar, that is to say the family of organizations around the RSS. So its political party, its trade union, its student organization, and so on. That is normally colloquially called the Sangha. Now, the Sang did not exist at all when that book was flourishing between 1938 and 1948. So what could perhaps be meaningful is to say that we is considered the basic charter of the RSS, of that specific organization. So already it has no connection with the present day political party BJP, of which the ties with the RSS have become looser and looser anyway. But so at any rate, that party was first created in 1951, was then reconstituted in 1980, both times when the booklet We had already gone out of use. So to make it the basic charter of the Sang is a bit a bizarre expression. Moreover, as if a basic charter means a founding text, then the book is 14 years too young, because the Sang was, or the RSS, was founded in 1925, which is 14 years before that book was written. So the statement that it was the basic charter comes across as untrue. You see, whether Akshaya Mukul was telling a lie or whether he really believed what he was saying, I don't know. I cannot look in people's skull. But it is at any rate untrue. So the book hasn't played any role. It wasn't the basic charter of the Sang, but okay, we can agree that given the importance of Golwalkar within his organization, anything that he wrote has a certain importance. But in 1948, the book was discarded by Golwalkar himself and by the other leaders of the RSS. The late K.R. Malkani, who was a long-time leader of the RSS, not their top leader, but one of the prominent figures, told me personally about Golwalkar's own misgivings about that book. So anyway, this shift, so to speak, away from the booklet We was never controversial within the Sang itself. So they wholeheartedly discarded the book in 1948 already. So there is not really a major ideological shift when in 2006 the RSS made headlines in the Times of India by officially disowning the book. So they made a statement where they said that this book is not our basic ideological charter. Now, it hadn't been since at least 1948. And in fact, it had never been its basic ideological charter, but okay, it had a certain importance. Even that it didn't have anymore by 1948. But so, of course, it is a good thing that that they are explicit about this and say that they disown this book. So, the official expression, the RSS has officially rejected Golwalkar's book We as, and I quote, neither representing the views of the grown Guruji nor of the RSS. Guruji means Golwalkar. He was called Guruji because he had been a professor of biology in Banaras Hindu University. Just as the founder of the RSS is called Dr. G because he was a medical doctor. So the book was immature and everything. It was obviously derivative. It was a second-hand exercise. It lapsed into intemperate language here and there, at least in the original edition. Later that was straightened out. So the last publication of the book was in 1947, his fourth reprint, then it disappeared. Golwalkar's immaturity was, in a sense, representative of the immaturity typical of the whole colonial condition. You see, original thinkers were few and far between in India in the 1930s, which looked up to the West and copied all its models, often in a half-digested version. For instance, Jawaharlal Nehru was a parrot, nothing more, a parrot of Cambridge socialism. Subhash Chandra Bose dreamed of a synthesis between communism and fascism. You would have to smile about that idea, but so in the 30s, this was the level of Indian political thinking. So it is no surprise that Golwalkar sought inspiration from the West, or from what he called the modern democratic states of the West. You see, he never ever doubts the value of democracy. That already is one big difference with the Nazis. In his booklet, supposedly a token or a sign of sympathy for Nazism, he explicitly does not agree with the Nazi rejection of democracy. On the contrary, he takes democracy for granted. On the other hand, his first grappling with political thought was in fact more sophisticated than what is thought to be the RSS party line. For example, the RSS is accused of following the leader principle. And that is a term that resonates with fascism. However, even in the RSS, this is not at all drawn from fascism, but from the ancient Hindu veneration for gurus, for venerable figures. But Golwalkar never embraces that principle. You see, he goes for democracy all through. Though he could have gotten away with the rejection of democracy. You see, in the 1930s, it was very common to reject what was called bourgeois democracy and instead opt for either fascism or communism, or at any rate a return to some pre-modern form of government different from democracy. For example, the king of my country, Belgium, King Leopold III, rejected democracy. Of course, he was forced to function within an existing system, but he made it very clear that his heart was not in democracy, that he believed in a strong leadership. So Golwalkar could easily have said that, and yet he didn't. So now we come to one of the two harmful or damaging quotes. Golwalkar writes, "The non-Hindu peoples in Hindustan must either adopt the Hindu culture and language. They must not only give up their attitude of intolerance and ungratefulness towards this land and its age-long traditions, but must also cultivate the positive attitude of love and devotion instead. In one word, they must cease to be foreigners, or they may stay in the country, wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, far less any preferential treatment, not even citizens' rights." And so let's go over it again. He claims to know that the minorities, the Muslims as well as the Christians, have shown in the past an attitude of intolerance and ungratefulness towards India. That attitude of intolerance, there's simply no doubt about it that this has been there. A visible sign of it is the numerous Hindu temples that have been destroyed, of which art historians study the ruins. ungratefulness. Well, both Muslims and Christians have enjoyed the material wealth of India, no doubt. But whether they accept it, let alone glorified its culture, is a different matter. They must cease to be foreigners. Now, what that means is they have to assimilate into the Hindu nation. This is the nation that he talks of, not the Indian nation, but the Hindu nation. And so the Indian nation is nothing but the Hindu nation, but those who don't accept Hinduism are not part of it. They may become part of it, they may assimilate into Hindu culture, but that is their choice. You see, they may also choose to remain foreigners, not to assimilate. But in that case, they will be treated as foreigners. They may be resident in the country, but then they are not full citizens of the country. So in that case, they have to accept whatever laws the Hindu nation votes. They themselves have no say in it, as they are foreigners. But so they may make that choice. They are perfectly allowed to make that choice. They may, in that case, also stay in the country. Golwalkar says it very explicitly. He doesn't want to throw them out, let alone kill them. No, they may stay in the country. But then they should not claim privileges, as they enjoy in today's India. So in that case, they should not have citizens' rights. They should have the rights that I, for instance, have now. Being in India, I am treated as a foreigner. I have, of course, no voting rights here. So that much the Muslims and Christians should accept. Otherwise, they may stay in the country. That's what he says. Now, the leftist quoters of this passage pretend that this is a warrant for genocide, a Holocaust of the minorities. Now, given their permanent state of hysteria when dealing with Hindu nationalism, I am not sure if not some of them actually believe what they are saying when they say this. You know, I'm not saying that they are lying. Perhaps they are speaking an untruth because they really believe it. That I leave up to them. But so their statement, of course, that I can evaluate. They say it is a warrant for genocide, a Holocaust of the minorities. And yet the text is very explicit that far from wanting to kill or even expel the Muslims and the Christians, Golwalkar agrees to let them stay in the country and live safely, you see, as honored guests, as residents in this Hindu Rashtra, in this Hindu state, only without citizens' rights. Now, I don't think I find it acceptable. I don't think this religious discrimination should be made. I also have the impression that the RSS by now doesn't stand by this demand anymore. The BJP certainly doesn't. The BJP certainly believes that everybody who is a citizen of India can remain a citizen of India, that his chosen religion is no objection to that. But you see, Gowalkar, of course, did effectively believe that only Hindus should have full citizen's rights in India. Well, yes, maybe we don't agree with that, but we can also see that this is totally different from genocide or from ethnic cleansing. In fact, what non-Hindus suffer in that case is exactly the condition of dhimitude in Islam. In fact, it is rather better than dhimitude, but it is of the same nature. Dhimitude means that in Islamic states, non-Muslims suffer a number of debilities. Of course, they have no citizens' rights, they are tolerated, they have no rights, they only have privileges that the Islamic State allows them and that it can always withdraw. Today, Saudi Arabia goes a lot farther in practicing discrimination against the minorities than Golwalkar ever did. Like, for example, Gowalkar has no problem with the existence of churches and mosques and processions and pilgrimages to their sacred places and so on. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, this is highly problematic. This dhimitude, which is an imposed condition of third-class citizens or third-class residents for the minorities, you see, this is bad enough. It shouldn't be there, though it exists in a number of Islamic countries. And so those who denounce it in the case of Golwalkar would have a bit more credibility if they also went out to denounce it in the case of Islamic states. You see, Golwalkar had a few ideas which he committed to writing long ago, which he also discarded long ago. So, you see, his view of dhimitude only existed on paper in the dim and distant past. By contrast, in Islamic states, it exists in practice, affecting millions of people today. So, you see, if all these secularists fail to criticize this situation existing today in countries that India has close relations with, well, then their excitement about what someone wrote in the 1930s is not very credible. In recent decades, another passage from this booklet has become even more popular. In fact, about the Hindu movement, most outsiders know two things. This is nowadays standard fare in every introduction to the subject of Hindu nationalism, namely that one of them murdered the Mahatma, and the other is the following quotation. German race pride has now become the topic of the day. To keep up the purity of the race and its culture, Germany shocked the world by her purging the country of the Semitic races, the Jews. Race pride at its highest has been manifested here. Germany has also shown how well nigh impossible it is for races and cultures having differences going to the root to be assimilated into one united whole, a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by. Though the RSS spokesman never specified it, it is very obviously this passage that has prompted them to publicly disown the book We Are Nationhood Defined. Now, analyzing this passage is a little bit difficult. We will have to cross a hurdle, namely because when the word Nazi is uttered, then all rational thought goes out the window, hysteria takes over. And so people think that they are seeing things which aren't there. And in particular, in this passage, they read things that have never been written. So what does this controversial race pride quote fail to contain? What is not in there that people always see in there? Now, conspicuous in its absence for a passage which is always taken to mean that Gowalkar worshipped Hitler and that he was a Nazi, is that neither the word Nazi nor the word Hitler is present. He could have included them easily, even in Britain, in the country, the home country of his colonial rulers. Hitler had a relatively good press. Like, for example, in the Munich Agreement in 1938, that very year, the British and even the French, who had a very strong grudge against Germany, conceded the inclusion of German-speaking territories into Germany, part of Czechoslovakia and Austria, which was exactly what the German population of these regions wanted. So it was not an anti-democratic demand, it was simply a fulfillment of what was formulated in World War I by the American President Wilson, namely the self-determination of peoples. So that was exercised at that time, and Britain found it reasonable. So you see, former prime ministers of Britain, like Lloyd George, and also, of course, the historical enemy of the Nazis, namely Winston Churchill, spoke positively about Hitler. Now, he, that is Golwalkar, could perfectly have done that, yet he doesn't. And so it was perfectly acceptable in India at that time to be pro-Nazi, especially among the opposition in the freedom movement, among common people. Many hoped that somehow the Germans would defeat the British and thus bring the independence of India closer. In fact, as late as Christmas Eve 1940, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a personal letter to Hitler, addressing him as my friend, and again saying a number of positive things about him. So, like saying, for instance, that he was not as bad as his enemies painted him. So, even 2 years before, you know, when the situation was not at all as tense as in 1940, Gowalkar could have said the same thing, and he didn't. In fact, apart from this one passage, it was not in Golwalkar's mind to draw attention to the existing regime in Germany. Certainly not to portray it as a model to be emulated. On the contrary, elsewhere in the same book, and of course any historian, any literature scholar is taught to read things in context. So in this case, if you go beyond these two passages and read the book as a whole, and certainly read it within its historical context, you see a lot of things that go entirely against this leftist reading. So he writes that in contrast with the militaristic barbarity of the contemporaneous Germans, the Hindus have their spiritual giants who stalk the world in serene majesty. And they, not any German heroes, but Indian heroes, serve as the homegrown role model for modern India. Also, he concludes the booklet with the rather un-Nazi vision of, and I quote, one glorious, splendorous Hindu nation benignly shedding peace and plenty over the world. Further, he supports the Czech position against Germany on the disputed Sudetenland. Sudetenland, which was allying to Germany, which was becoming a part of Germany, separating from Czechoslovakia. So he gave us his opinion that the Czechs had made a mistake in not forcibly assimilating its German minority. After all, it had had 20 years the time since World War I. It could have worked hard in Czechoslovakifying its German minority, but it had never done so. So here he is clearly favoring the policy of assimilation carried out by modern states, where the minorities are nudged into joining the majority. Like, for instance, in the French Republic, with its aura of liberalism, a consistent policy was carried out since the French Revolution of turning the Bretons, the Flemish, the Basques into Frenchmen. of encouraging the French language and making the minority languages disappear. So in fact, in this passage at least, it's not really argued in the book as a whole, but in this passage at least, Golwalkar seems to support the modern states against minorities, specifically the German minority in Czechoslovakia. So there, if he had sided with the Nazis, he would of course have supported the German minority there. But no, he doesn't, and precisely that is the lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by. Namely that two nations within one state ultimately leads to trouble. You either have to get rid of a minority or, and that is what he advocates, you have to assimilate the minority. And that, of course, is exactly the opposite of what Hitler advocated. Hitler was faced with a Jewish minority within Germany. His policy was to dissimulate this minority, to not make them part of the German nation. In fact, most of them had, to a large extent, Germanified. And so what he wanted was to reverse this evolution, to make them un-German again. He prohibited them from displaying the German flag, for instance. Now, many examples of ethnic conflicts within one state could have been given. The example then in the eye of the world was Germany, especially after 1935, when Germany had defined the Jews as a separate nation in the Nuremberg laws. The intermarriage between Germans and Jews was prohibited, just like in Islam the intermarriage between Muslims and non-Muslims is prohibited. Again, if you get excited about this Nazi policy, you become a lot more credible if you equally denounce this Islamic policy. In fact, the extremely orthodox among the Jews didn't mind this German law because they themselves also frowned upon the increasing assimilation of the Jews within German society. They also wanted the Jews to be more separate. So at that time in the 30s, all kinds of things were still possible and all kinds of opinions were afloat. It was not the simple black and white equation that we had during the Second World War. Another thing that Hitler did, and that is again part of the policy of separating the nations that Gowalkar somehow did approve, was the German policy of limiting the participation of Jews within the professions. You know, in some sensitive professions they were excluded altogether. In many others, their participation was limited to their percentage in the population. That is exactly a policy that is now considered progressive, that of affirmative action. You see, in American universities, you should not have more whites than there are whites in the population, not more Chinese than there are Chinese in the population, and so on. Well, that policy was pioneered by Nazi Germany. I don't think it's a good policy, but anyway, it is very different from genocide. It is also said that Golwalkar supported the German hatred for, and there they quote, the Semitic races, the Jews. Now that really is the central point of National Socialism, is the hatred against the Jews. You see that they were against democracy. That was part of the political circumstances at the time. That was not so fundamental. In fact, there were very many peoples around the world who, for different reasons, were against democracy at the time, chiefly the Soviet Union, but many others as well. By contrast, anti-Semitism was entirely central to National Socialism. Did Golwalkar support anti-Semitism? Well, here we need not hesitate, we need not be equivocal. Here we are very sure he was not at all anti-Semitic. In his survey of nations, because it's not only Nazi Germany, that's just very briefly mentioned in a list of many other nations, which he also holds up as models. The nations whose experience are to serve as a lesson for us in Hindustan to profit by. The very first one is the Jewish nation. That nation he really holds up as an example. Now this is standard fare among Hindu nationalists. They look up steeply to the Jewish nation because they have managed to maintain their identity for about 2000 years when they did not have a state of their own, under very adverse circumstances. They also managed to revive the Hebrew language and make it not even into a language that all Jews know, but in fact in a language that more than half of the Jews now accept as their mother tongue. Whereas in India, the Hindus are not even capable to elevating Sanskrit as a common link language, let alone making it the mother tongue. So Hindus are also proud of the fact that they, unlike all the Christian and Muslim nations, have always treated their Jewish minority well. This is also acknowledged by the Israeli ambassador, is well known. So not only is it a fact of history that Hindus have treated the Jews well, they also acknowledge it and are proud of it. To them, this is an important point that they can be proud of. And yet, anti-Semitism was the core of Nazism, and Golwalkar did not share it. In the modern age, when Zionism came about, the Hindu movement immediately started supporting Zionism, which was not only Jewish, but which was also nationalist. They conceived of the Jewish nation as the normal subject for ruling a Jewish state. Just as they wanted to have a Hindu state, they thought it normal that the Jews would have a Jewish state. After that, Hindu nationalist parties have always advocated diplomatic recognition of Israel, which Congress has conceded only in 1992, and the communists and several other parties, Islamic parties also, oppose even till today. So this explains the popularity of this offending quote in anti-Hindutva writings. The Indian leftists who exploit this quote no end, they have over the decades expanded their intellectual power base from India to the West, especially to the international media and to American academia, where they completely control the information flow about India to the West. And this firm control over Western public opinion then returns to India as another extra argument to fortify their own view of India. You see, they can say, oh, you see, the Westerners who are so enlightened, you see, they oppose this Hindu nationalism, so you should also oppose it if you don't do so already. However, in the United States, a particular circumstance is the power of the so-called Jewish lobby. And so there, the fact that the Indian left is strongly pro-Palestinian, pro-Islamic, anti-Israeli, is a bit of a hurdle. So they try to draw away the attention from that by their hyper-focus on something that might give the impression that Golwalkar, and thus by implication the entire Hindu movement, somehow is pro-Nazi and anti-Jewish. in which they pit one quote by Golwalkar in 1938 against a whole body of evidence from Hindu sources before and since then. In leftist articles about this particular quote, you often also find the claim, here Golwalkar is applauding the genocide of 6 million Jews. Now that is a lie. That's not even a mistake. It is really a deliberate lie. Those who make that claim either count on the complete ignorance of their readership, or they themselves must be extremely ignorant. Maybe they believe it, that I leave up to them. But it is at any rate not true. And this is very easy to show. In 1939, Gowalkar cannot have approved of a policy that was carried out only in 1941 to 44, and that became only known to the world in 1945, namely the Holocaust, the systematic extermination of the Jews. The purge to which Gowalkar referred was the progressive exclusion of the Jews from public life in Germany and the policy of promoting their emigration. Mainly the Nuremberg laws, which took place in 1935, that is before this book, and not in 1941-44, which is definitely after this book. And that took place only under specific and largely unforeseen war circumstances. So in 1938, the policy was still one of Jewish exclusion and encouraged emigration, which is not so nice, to force or nudge people to emigrate. But then, if we are comparing to the Holocaust, then the Jews know better than most people from their history that once in a while you have to change countries in order to survive, or in order to have a better life. You see, Jews have a long history of moving from one country to another, from Germany to Israel or to America would also have been acceptable to them, or at any rate preferable to extermination. Further, there is the fact that in 1938, the victims of Adolf Hitler were counted in hundreds. The lethal victims, I mean, were rather few. I mean, most dictators have that kind of record. Whereas Stalin's victims were already counted in millions, and that was in peacetime. We don't even speak of what he did during the war, but in peacetime, he killed millions of people. Like, for instance, in the forced famine in Ukraine, we speak of, and here the figures differ, between 2 million and 10 million people. So again, if you want to be excited and indignant about sympathies for Hitler in 1938, which in itself might make sense, then you would sound a lot more credible if you are proportionately even more indignant about what Stalin had done at the time. And so if anything is shocking about Golwalkar's book, it is perhaps that he included the Soviet Union among the countries that Hindustan should learn from. Further, conspicuous by its absence is also the presentation of the Nazi policy vis-à-vis the Jews as a possible model for the Hindu treatment of the Muslims. And yet, it is precisely to insinuate this inference that the left brings in that quote. When the BJP under Atal Bihari Vajpayee was going to come to power, there was a lot of speculation in foreign policy circles. What is going to happen? What will this government mean? I said at the time, it's going to mean nothing. it'll be business as usual. I dare say that I was vindicated by reality. I said the only thing that will make a difference is that they will, well, India has gone nuclear under Indira Gandhi, but they will explicitly and openly go nuclear, which is also what happened. But they didn't do anything with that. They didn't start a war against Pakistan or so. On the contrary, you see, they went for peace with Pakistan and even continued that policy, persisted with that policy after Pakistan had invaded India in Kargil. And yet, you see, to hear the experts, the big-time professors speak at that time, they were predicting gas chambers for Muslims. They were predicting, oh, the Hindus will throw all the Muslims into the Indian Ocean. And yet, in Golwalkar's booklet, it is not just extermination that is absent, there is not even any idea of expulsion. He doesn't want to throw the Muslims out, not in the Indian Ocean, but not anywhere else either. So, to conclude, the alleged Nazi sympathies revealed by the book's most controversial quote are a matter of eager overinterpretation. Their true proportions are in fact quite limited. Thank you.